The posse rode hard through the Arizona dark, horses blowing white breath in the cold desert air, lanterns swinging, the constable out front pushing the pace, angrier than any of them, demanding answers, demanding results, demanding that someone find the men who had dynamited a Southern Pacific safe at Cochise Station and ridden off with $10,000 in gold coin and currency on the night of September 9th, 1899. The constable's name was Burt Alvord. He was looking for himself. This is the history the frontier actually produced. Not the legend, not the mythology, but the unvarnished record of what men did, what it cost them, and what it cost the people who stood in their way. Alvord had earned his reputation the honest way. He had ridden deputy for John Slaughter, the Cochise County sheriff whose name alone had quieted rooms in the roughest settlements of southern Arizona. Slaughter declared Alvord fearless. That word, from that man, meant something in the territory. Alvord knew the roads, the passes, the waterholes, and the men who used them. He knew how posses were assembled and where they lost the trail. He knew the schedules of the Southern Pacific. He knew which express cars carried what and on which runs, and which guards were dangerous and which were not. In January 1899, he took the constable's badge in Wilcox, a railroad town in the shadow of the Dos Cabezas Mountains that needed a man of his experience. He deputized his friends. Among them was Billy Stiles, young, capable, as comfortable with a pistol as any man in Cochise County, and possessed of the specific quality that made him useful to Alvord's emerging plan. Stiles asked no difficult questions. By summer of that year, the plan was complete. Alvord and his deputy constable, Bill Downing, would establish the alibi. They would sit together in the back room of a Wilcox saloon on the night of September 9th, playing cards, making noise, ordering drinks loudly enough to be heard through the wall. Stiles and a man named Matt Burtz would board the train at Cochise Station, 11 miles southwest of Wilcox, and do the actual work. The express car would be detached and run west down the track, away from the passengers, away from witnesses. The safe would be opened with dynamite that Alvord had secured by breaking into a Wilcox powder house several nights earlier. It worked exactly as planned. The blast tore the safe apart. The gold and currency, at least $10,000 by subsequent accounting, went into saddlebags, and the four men split into the Chiricahua Mountains before the smoke had finished drifting across the desert floor. Back in Wilcox, Alvord and Downing were still at their card table, loud and visible, and entirely accounted for. The next morning, when news of the robbery reached town, Constable Burt Alvord organized the posse personally. He led them south with visible fury, pushing the pace, demanding they cover ground, directing the search away from the Chiricahuas, and toward every direction the actual fugitives were not. Sheriff Scott White rode with them. So did the veteran detective George Scarborough. Neither man found a track worth following, because the man who knew exactly where the tracks led was the man riding at the head of the column, telling them where to look. They searched for weeks. They found nothing. 5 months passed. Long enough, perhaps, for confidence to settle into complacency. Long enough for Alvord and Stiles to conclude that what had worked once would work again. On the night of February 14th, 1900, 5 men from the gang camped in the Dragoon Mountains and laid their plans for the following evening. The target was the Wells Fargo Express car on the Nogales to Benson run, which would stop at the depot in Fairbank, the closest rail connection to Tombstone, where the express business of one of the largest cities in the territory all passed through a single platform. Alvord and Stiles had planned the robbery for a specific night. They had planned it for a night when Jeff Milton was not supposed to be on that train. Jeff Milton, former Texas Ranger, Wells Fargo messenger, and a man whose reputation in the territory required no elaboration. He was supposed to have the night off. A coworker called in sick that morning. Milton took the run. Nobody told Billy Stiles. On the evening of February 15th, 1900, 5 men loitered on the Fairbank platform in the posture of drunken cowboys. The Southern Pacific pulled in from the west. Milton stood in the open door of the express car as the train slowed into the station, and the 5 men opened fire before he could step back. The bullets caught him in the left arm and side. He went down behind a trunk inside the car, wounded and bleeding onto the express car floor. The robbers saw him fall and moved toward the open door, certain the problem had resolved itself. Milton raised a Wells Fargo shotgun from the floor. Three-fingered Jack Dunlap was in the lead. 11 pellets of buckshot caught him in the midsection at near contact range and dropped him in the doorway. Bravo Juan Yoas, running a step behind, turned and caught the rest of the load in his back. The remaining 3 men fled into the desert dark. The express car held. Not $1 left it. The robbers left Dunlap where he fell. A posse found him hours later, lying wounded in the sand several miles from Fairbank, where his companions had abandoned him, alive and conscious, and with specific information to offer about who had organized the robbery he was dying from. He named Burt Alvord. He named the entire structure of what the 2 deputy constables had built over the past year. He died on February the 22nd, 1900, in Tombstone, with the account complete and in the hands of Sheriff White before his last breath. The man who had led the posse for 5 months was now the subject of it. Wells Fargo detectives moved quickly. Alvord was arrested and taken to the Cochise County Jail in Tombstone. Billy Stiles, calculating as ever, surrendered and turned state's evidence. He convinced the investigators to grant him trustee status, the freedom to move within the town while ostensibly cooperating with the prosecution. It was a performance. On April 7, 1900, Stiles walked back into the Tombstone jail with a concealed pistol. Deputy Sheriff George Bravin, the same man who had once employed Alvord as a deputy in Pierce, years before any of this had happened, was alone on the cell block. Stiles put the gun on him and demanded the keys. Bravin refused. Stiles shot him through the leg, the bullet passing through the calf and taking 2 toes off the other foot as it exited. He took the keys from the floor, opened every cell in the block, and invited 25 prisoners to walk out of the Tombstone jail into the April night. Most of them stayed. Downing stayed. Bravo Juan and Alvord did not. 1 week later, a Mexican man walked into the jail at Benson and handed the jailer an envelope. Inside were the keys to the Tombstone jail. The note accompanying them was signed by Alvord, Stiles, and Bravo Juan. It read, in part, "Tell the boys that we are well and eating regular." They ran for 3 years, south into Sonora, through the mountain country of northern Mexico, where the Arizona Rangers could not follow with legal authority and where the terrain made pursuit a matter of patience rather than speed. In 1902, the Rangers captain, Burt Alvord, reached Alvord through intermediaries with a proposition: bring in the notorious Mexican murderer Agustin Chacon, and Mossman would put in a word for clemency when the time came to surrender. Alvord and Stiles crossed back into Arizona territory in early 1904 to deliver on the arrangement. The Rangers met them in February of that year near the border. There was a final confrontation. Alvord was shot twice and went down. Stiles took a bullet and ran into Mexico, into whatever came next, into the long silence that the historical record has never fully broken. Alvord served 2 years in the territorial prison at Yuma. He was released in 1906 and crossed back into Mexico, where he reportedly worked as a miner in Panama in his final years. The exact date and circumstances of his death are not established by any record that has been recovered. Billy Stiles surfaced years later in Nevada, working as a deputy sheriff under the name William Larkin. He was killed in 1908 in a confrontation whose specific details remain disputed. His grave was moved when the cemetery that held him was closed. The records were lost. His name appears on a peace officer memorial in Reno, Nevada, listed as William L. Stiles, which is perhaps the most fitting conclusion available for a man who spent his life moving between the badge and the gun, with the ease of someone who had never fully accepted that the two were supposed to point in different directions. 2 lawmen, 5 years of running, a $10,000 safe blown open with stolen dynamite, while the men who planned it led the posse looking for themselves. The Arizona Territory produced a great many things in the years before statehood. It never produced another Burt Alvord, a man who understood the law so completely from the inside of it that he used that understanding to stay ahead of it for half a decade. Until the night Jeff Milton picked up a shotgun from the floor of an express car, bleeding and certain he was about to die, and decided that the Wells Fargo car was not theirs to have. Some men hold. The rest of the story writes itself.